our number one investment idea for 2016. Trading at 1 times 2016's estimated revenue, this tiny stock is now partnering with billion-dollar giants, filling the huge void left by Motorola to a potential $10 billion market. This company has attracted significant shareholders in its industry and a fund that has close ties with the Disney family. With an enormous 60% insider and management ownership, this small company is becoming a cash gusher very quickly. Learn more about this 30-cent stock at futuremoneytrends.com/win. Greetings and thank you for joining us at futuremoneytrends.com. Our guest today is Charles Savoie of silverstillers.net, nosilvernationalization.org, and much of his work is archived on David Morgan's site, silver-investor.com. He's done extensive research for the precious metals and manipulation, as well as a secret society. This interview is going to have a wealth of information, and it should be some great stories that you've never heard of, and I've never heard of. Well, hey, let's get right into this interview. So first off, you've been doing extensive research on precious metals for how long?
14 years.
14 years. You have had some of your work published, but I would say, as someone who has done a lot of silver research myself, it is not out there on most of the major precious metal sites. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Now, David Morgan, though, has picked up your stuff, and certainly Future Money Trends is now picking it up as of this interview. So you've done a ton of information or research and information out there, and it's all free, which, again, is truly amazing. So I want to just kind of start off with an introduction of how this all started for you, and what was kind of the snowflake that caused the avalanche for you when you went all in on just going down this rabbit hole of precious metal manipulation and the role of gold and silver in the world of finance and government.
Okay, well, when I was a boy of almost 11, in the early summer of 1965, I was at a laundromat, and I saw the first clad coins coming into our change, and I was alarmed and shocked, and I told the person that I was down there with, hey, we need to get as many of these silver coins as we can. And I got overruled, and the manager came out and says, what's the problem? He says, well, the new coins will run the machines just as well. And I'm thinking, yeah, but you can get a mile down the road in a Cadillac or on a skateboard. Which would you rather use? And so 11 years later, no, excuse me, it's more like 7 years later, I was reading a book by somebody named Gary Allen about Nixon, the man behind the mask, and he mentioned a mentor of Richard Nixon by the name of Elmer Bobst, B-O-B-S-T, who was the head of Warner Lambert Pharmaceutical. And Gary Allen said just one thing about it and didn't elaborate. He says, Bobst is a member of the highly secret Pilgrim Society, which is even closer to the inner circle of the conspiracy than the CFR. Well, oh my, that just turned me upside down. I'm going to find out everything I can about this thing. Well, I did. I set out on a quest to find out everything I could about them. And in May of 1979, I went to a university speech at Texas Christian University in Fort Worth, given by the then British ambassador to the UN, Sir Ivor Seward Richard, S-E-W-A-R-D was his middle name. And it turned out that his maternal grandfather was our Secretary of State, William Seward, who made the Alaska Purchase from Russia in 1867. Now, the Pilgrim Society represents the last great secret of modern history. It represents history's greatest influence network. It represents history's biggest investment trust. It represents the exploitative dynastic families of the century's old worldwide British Empire, who amalgamated in this nearly unknown group with the so-called robber barons of the 19th century in railroads, oil, coal, steel, banking, land, ocean-going shipping. And the person who had the inspiration to form this organization was Cecil Rhodes, who formed the Gold and Diamond Trust in South Africa. And he also created the Rhodes Scholars. Well, it's always been members of the Pilgrims Society as trustees of the Rhodes Trust at Oxford, England, who control the Rhodes Scholars. And here's a little quote from the Review of Reviews, New York, May 1902, pages 556 to 559. I'm not going to read it all, just a little bit. The only thing feasible to carry this idea out is a secret society gradually absorbing the wealth of the world to be devoted to such an object, and that object reuniting the United States and Great Britain as a base for world government. There is Hirsch with 20 millions very soon across the unknown borders, struggling in the dark to know what to do with his money. And so one might go on ad infinitum. What a scope and what a horizon of work for the next 2 centuries, the best energies of the best people in the world, perfectly feasible, but needing an organization. For it is impossible for one human atom to contemplate anything, much less such an idea as this, requiring the devotion of the best souls of the next 200 years. There are 3 essentials. 1, the plan duly weighed and agreed to. 2, the first organization. 3, the seizure of the wealth necessary, end quote. Of the Rhodes Scholars, Rhodes himself declared, I am on the lookout for those who will do the governing of the nations in the years that are to come. Then there was a book in 1946 called The Empire of the City, World Superstate, privately published. Page 9, we find the Pilgrims Society described as the most powerful international society on earth. The Pilgrims is so wrapped in silence that few Americans know even of its existence since 1903. There was a book put out officially by the Society in London in 1943, Pilgrim Partners, 40 Years of British-American Fellowship. And on page 85, he said, the cooperation of many minds has been necessary to give the Pilgrims the assured position the Society occupies. What is their assured position? The world fiat money power. Now keep in mind, this is 11 years before Bilderberg even existed. The Christian Science Monitor, April 19, 1941, page 4, Anglo-American Pilgrim's Progress stated, to go through the list would reveal a dossier of some of the greatest men of our time. I mentioned Gary Allen. He also had something in American Opinion magazine, September 1970, page 15. He says, the elitist Pilgrim Society seeks to merge the United States into the British Commonwealth as a base for world government. The major international banking firms, that is, bullion banks, on both sides of the Atlantic are well represented in the Pilgrim Society. That article was titled A Look at Establishment Newspapers. He had a follow-up about teleslick television networks in October that year, 1970. He said, the Pilgrim Society, sometimes called the world's most secret organization, has as its goal the reuniting of England and America. And later in that article, he says, the super-secret Pilgrim Society, whose official logo is entwined American and British flags, is dedicated to merging Britain and America. I found an Italian website that said, the Pilgrims Society remained hidden until relatively recent years to identify the apex of power. In testimony delivered in the House of Representatives of the U.S. Congress on August 19, 1940 by Montana Congressman Thorkelson, a silver advocate, regarding the Pilgrims Society and its intent to merge us into a British-controlled world empire, stated this, there are several curious things about these pilgrim functions. In the first place, there is present at these dinners an array of notables such as would be difficult to bring together under one roof for any other purpose and by any other society. This, again, was 14 years before Bilderberg even existed. Congressman Thorkelson, in the same discourse, referred to an address by Joseph H. Choate, Vanderbilt family operative, big railroad dynasty, one of the founders of the Pilgrims organization, as saying that those who would many years later celebrate the start of the 2nd century of the Pilgrims Society in 2003, quote, will have cause to bless their fathers that they founded this society and kept the world on the right track.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
The Pilgrims. So you've established there is a Pilgrim Society from your research, from, I mean, many publications, from many actions that they may have done, where, as far as they are now, because we hear about all these different secret societies, I've heard about them from many people, and I'm trying to figure out where are they affecting the average person's life, like right now? Because I think that's when a lot of listeners listen to this and they go, look, we can't do anything about these societies. They're already deeply embedded in all of government, in all of finance, in every aspect of our life. They already won. Is there anything anyone can even do about this?
Well, okay. The reason that I'm on to the Pilgrims organization in particular, hey, I can give you a talk about Bilderberg. I can give you a talk about the Wolf's Head Society at Yale, Spacehead Society at Cornell, the former Encuentros del Siglo Doble X, which was a hemispheric equivalent to Bilderberg some years ago, Center for Inter-American Relations. I've been into all that. But the Pilgrims are the capstone organization. They not only represent the British Empire wealth and the North American robber baron wealth, but the English branch especially is intermarried with old European royal houses tracing back close to 2,000 years. And you want to know what we can do about it? Well, if you'll notice, you can get online to the Council on Foreign Relations, which is their primary subsidiary organization, and you can access a membership roster there. Bilderberg has an official site. They have a roster that's publicly viewable. Same thing with the Trilateral Commission. Well, all these groups are just fronts for this other one, and the Pilgrims stand alone in a number of aspects, and one of those is that they do not release lists to the public. However, there have been a number of leaked lists that we've been able to find, such as in the genealogical archives of the New York Public Library, and that was quite an undertaking. And so you want to know what we can do about it. Well, the first thing we can do about it is to be aware that they're there. And Bilderberg started putting out rosters because they were under a lot of pressure to do that. The Pilgrim Society has not been under pressure to do that, and we need to pressure them to do that. And so that would be, in my opinion, the first step toward beginning to neutralize them, is to know about them. And so we need legislation. We need legislation to audit the Fed. We need to get rid of the Fed. We need to allow competing currencies and let the public, let the marketplace decide which currencies they want to use. And we don't have a free market. And
isn't the public too dumb to even fight these people?
No, I have a little bit more faith in them than that. But you wanted to know.
I don't know. Have you been to a mall recently?
Yeah, I know. I know what you're saying. They have professional sports teams. They have Dr. Oz. They have Oprah Winfrey. They have Hollywood and all these other baseball teams, professional wrestling. Vince McMahon, he's probably a member. Okay, he's big enough to be a member. He's in those circles of the WWE. And they have all this distracting the public. And I understand what you're saying, but in 2012 over in London, they had one of their meetings, and I've got the PDF that came out of that, and they were ridiculing my findings. So I got their attention. And if more websites would start covering this, we could pressure them to start posting a list. For instance, in 2002 and 2003, they put out some very short-run books, centennial historical editions, The Pilgrims of Great Britain, 2002, The Pilgrims of the U.S., 2003. They're difficult to come by, and but I have them both, and I have several of their other volumes from the 1940s. And but if you have one of these books, pay close attention. They don't post a roster in there from 2002 and 2003. Now, what's keeping them from doing that? If you go to their website, let me back up a second. In January 2011, I came out with silverstealers.net, and the following June, I was surprised to see they replied to that without naming my site, but they put up pilgrimsociety.org, which is from England. You know, the American members of the junior partners of this thing, no matter how big they are, they're the junior partners. So, but they don't post a list. they don't post a roster, they're hiding something.
Okay, so how involved are they? I mean, is this all secretive people that we don't see, or are we talking Bernanke and Yellen and President Obama?
Well, let me say this. I guess we won't be able to get into it today. Possibly another time. But I had a review here of the 1957 Executive Committee during the Eisenhower years, and also a briefer rundown on the 1980 Executive Committee. But you're asking, what part of our lives do they affect? They affect everything. They run the Federal Reserve. I put out something called Who Controls the Gold-Stealing New York Fed Bank? And you can find it at Morgan's site, and it's giving you blow by blow. Everybody at the Jekyll Island, Georgia meeting that led to the creation of the Fed was a member except one person, and that was the stenographer named A. Piat Andrew. They're all members. They're all been identified, documented as members from the 1914 roster, which we were very lucky to get. And they created the Great Depression by dumping Indian silver onto the world market. They see the Far East, their money was silver. For centuries, India, China, the rest of the Far East, their currency was silver. And the British came in with opium and turned 45 million Chinese into opium addicts. And they said, hey, the only way you can pay us is silver. And so they sucked a lot of silver out of China. And then the Silver Purchase Act in 1934 sucked an additional, possibly another billion ounces out of China. I know in one instance they sucked 565,855,000 ounces. That's a Treasury Department figure posted in the Commercial and Financial Chronicle. I've got all this in the Silver Stealers. It's a chronology of how they caused the Great Depression. The crash in 1929 had almost nothing to do with it. All that was about was recovering their payrolls and hurting new rich that were not part of this circle. But the reason the fall in the price of silver caused the depression is the British crashed the price of silver to 24.5 cents an ounce in February 1931. And at that time, we actually had robust export industries to the Far East. So did England and Europe. So when the value of the purchasing power of their money was killed by the British dumping an excess of silver onto the world markets, it killed their purchasing power, and we had to idle millions of workers over here. That's what caused the mass unemployment, was the British attack on silver, moving the world off of silver gradually, more and more, until finally in 1968 in June, they halted the redemption or conversion of silver certificates. You couldn't go get silver for them anymore. This has all come out of the Pilgrim Society, and these other groups are just splinters of it.
Okay, so you've definitely established the Pilgrims. So I want to get into precious metals more because that is one of the things that I think your research really kind of opens up when it comes to the manipulation and the suppression of precious metals. So for first off, you've done some great research on nationalization. I also think you bring up one of the best points I've ever heard. So many times the crowd that says you don't hold it, you don't own it, physical only. But you know what? They always allege that the reason not to buy the miners is because of nationalization, when in fact you point out that the U.S. has not really nationalized the mines for monetary purposes. However, they have monetized gold and silver, physical precious metals. So let's talk about nationalization. Do you think there is a risk of nationalization of either physical precious metals or mining shares?
Well, there's a risk of nationalization of both. And, the worst acts of savagery that these people, and by the way, they never rattle before they strike. Okay, but the worst acts of barbarism that they commit against people's wealth is an appeal to national emergency conditions. So this Middle East thing, or maybe the South China Sea would be the flashpoint. They could have a national emergency and Obama could come on the air on a Sunday, for instance, like Roosevelt did, and he could say, look, we've got a monetary crisis, turn in your gold, we'll pay you a non-inflationary rate for your gold. We've had a committee of economists from Harvard and Princeton and Yale. They got together and they figured out that a non-inflationary rate for your gold will be $250 the ounce. It's treason if you don't turn it in within 60 days. We've got an emergency. And then turn in your silver, too, because it sure as hell isn't money, but we have to have it for military and technological purposes. Oh, and we talked to the Silver Users Association, and they told us that a non-inflationary rate for silver would be $1.29 an ounce, the old monetary figure. So we are at some risk of that, and so it isn't the government that's the threat. It's this private organization. It's a phalanx of old rich. In North America, it traces back to colonial times, Dutch colonial times, British colonial times. The Dutch were actually had the jump on the British in colonizing the northeast of the U.S. They called it New Amsterdam. In 1664, the British took over for the final time and renamed it New York. And the landed wealthy Dutch who got huge colonial land grants like the Schuyler's, the Van Rensselaers, and the Bayards and others under the Dutch rule. They were allowed to retain all of their holdings after pledging loyalty to the Crown of England. And these people were wealthy way before the Rockefellers and even before the Rothschilds were wealthy. And you can look at all the old familiar names: Astor, Harriman, Drexel, Duke, Reynolds, Coleman, Vanderbilt, Schiefelins, which you probably haven't heard of that one, but they're pretty big, the Van Cortlandts, and many other dynasties. In England, the Kleinworts, who traced from William the Conqueror, and the Kleinworts were the ones that enabled Goldman Sachs and Company to get an entry into the international market. And this thing is deep, and their genealogies are just way, way, way off the scale. And that's why they don't put in a membership roster, because this is the last group that stands at the top. Every mountain has a point of top altitude, and this is it, as far as I'm concerned. And I don't want to get into a lot of religious stuff because that can get sensitive, but we can't ignore history either. And there's been a historical colonial empire conflict between, for instance, Spain and England, and Spain was Catholic, of course. And in the 16th century, Henry VIII kicked the Vatican representatives out of England, started the Church of England. There was some conflicts after that. Then they had the Supremacy Act of 1559. And Francis Drake seized Spanish silver on the high seas in 1572. That's how long England has been suppressing silver, for 443 years. And then the Spanish Armada was sent to invade England in 1588, but the English defeated it with the help of the weather. And ever since then, England has held the whip hand in world affairs over Rome. And the royal powers of continental Europe recognized ages past that of all the what we could call European countries, England was the best power base by far of any of them. Why? Because it's protected from in land invasion. You have to cross the sea to invade England. Any other country in continental Europe, you don't have to cross the sea. So they shifted most of their power to London.
So, if this group is so heavily involved in all aspects of our lives, and somebody buys precious metals to hedge against so many unsustainable financial things in the U.S. and the world, why even own precious metals? Do you advocate an ownership of precious metals and mining shares? I mean, because it seems like...
Well, I have both, and I was a private placement participant with one of the two biggest back in 2001, and it's been very good for me. I'm thinking that they wouldn't have to nationalize gold and silver or gold and silver mining companies. What they could do to suck everybody dry of their finances is get laws at the national level in all 50 states. Hey, you've got to get 49 vaccines every year, or else the police come for you and jail you, confiscate your house. And so If you do that, these vaccines do what they're strategized to do, which is to give you recurring illnesses, and then you go to a hospital chain to get treatment, like Hospital Corporation of America, and the wife of one of these Pilgrims members is on the board of directors of that. Earlier, there was another one identified on the directors of that who was part of the Wells Fargo interests. The Wells Fargo interests were among the founders of the Pilgrims in 1903 in New York. But so they'll charge you at these hospitals so much that there's nothing left of your net worth. And, you know, we hear about what Obamacare is doing to people's wealth. So I think that the medical system is a bigger threat than the threat of taking gold and silver. But one of the first threats in gold and silver that they might launch is to require all gold and silver exchanges, whether internet or brick and mortar, that whenever they buy gold or silver coin or bullion, could apply to platinum, palladium, rhodium-2 from the public. Hey, you got to turn it into the Treasury Department. You can't resell it to another member of the public. And so now we hear about Texas with a Texas Gold Bank, Gold Bullion Depository, and I tried to get in touch with some of these representatives, and some of them act like, huh? What? I don't understand. You know, you've got to reinvent the wheel for them, and what it's about is, I says, you can't wait until the building is constructed to demand return of your gold from, I don't know if it's HSBC New York or the Federal Reserve Bank in New York, but it's Pilgrim Society members running both of them. And now I notice that they've got a CFR member on the trustees of UTIMCO, the University of Texas Investment Management Company, and they're saying, UTIMCO board is saying, hey, we don't want the Texas gold touched unless there's a guarantee that it remains part of the COMEX system. See, so I said to these state representatives, you've got to oust the members of this UTIMCO board and get some better people there that'll look after the interests of the state residents rather than these sellouts.
Yeah, but it seems like there's just the sellouts are everywhere. And like you said, even in previous engagement with public or not public companies, but publishers, you know, or even like a Rand Paul, where you've come into the situation where they will only go so far against these people.
Yeah, I contacted Rand and I said, look, why don't you intro a bill and see if you can get some co-sponsors to have the Department of Defense start reconstructing a United States silver strategic stockpile. They had 165 million ounces originally in that stockpile, starting in the early 1970s. And that was gradually drained for price suppression. Now, the last 8 million ounces of that went for coinage of silver eagles. And I think the reason they allowed that was to point to and say, hey, no, we allowed it to go to monetary purposes. Yeah, just a few percentage of it they did.
Yeah, so I mean, it seems like there's a big wall that we have to climb. We are out of time, sir. So I'm going to send everybody to silverstillers.net. Charles Savoie. Thank you so much, sir, for your time, and hopefully we can have you back on the show maybe in about a month, and we'll have to schedule an hour so we can go into some of these things in more detail. Again, thanks for reaching out to Future Money Trends, and I look forward to spending some more time on your site over the holiday week.
Okay, adios.